the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have Bill Bennett back in the studio. How are you, Bill?
I'm good, Paul.
Always very good to catch up, and we always have great chats. So I'm looking forward to our discussions today. Maybe you can remind listeners where you fit into this big wide world of journalism and tech in New Zealand.
Well, yeah, I'm a journalist. I write a lot about business and in amongst that, lots of technology. In fact, probably I'm better known for most people as a technology journalist. Yeah.
Well, let's jump in, and of course, big thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, Spark, HP, 2 Degrees, and Gorilla Technology. Now, on the New Zealand front, it's quite interesting topics to delve into. So we're going to get into that. A big piece that RNZ published over the weekend around the surveillance society, who is watching you and how. And so I wanted to tap in on that topic. Also, the role of AI cameras or AI and cameras, I guess you can call them AI cameras on buses from a local perspective, and following on from something that you've published in the last couple of weeks, delving a little bit into the impact of Huawei, effectively exiting the New Zealand market when it has come to sort of smartphones and so on. Keen to look at some of the newer gadgets. So at the moment, I'm using the new HP OmniBook, which is one of their newest laptops, and this is one of these Copilot Plus PCs, as Microsoft like them to call it. And it includes the Snapdragon X Elite chip, which is, I guess, what traditionally we would have thought as a smartphone chip, but inside the laptop. So we'll delve into that, and also have been having a little bit of a look at Samsung's newest handsets. They've got the Z Fold and the Z Flip, or the Z Fold and the Z Flip, depending on whether you want to apply New Zealand terminology, and then there's some interesting international topics that's probably cross over in some ways with what we're talking about in New Zealand, and also things happening around the world, the riots and so on going on in the UK. So let's see how we go for time, but I'm keen, Bill, to start by having a little bit of a chat around this story. Phil Pennington, long-standing reporter for RNZ.
He's good at this kind of story too. Yeah,
really, really fascinating. I had the link sort of shared with me, and I guess I was sort of thinking this was going to be a pretty short piece that tapped in on a couple of topics, but there's a fair bit that's gone into looking at the role of sort of surveillance in New Zealand society, and I think it's important that we do delve in, and the media reports on these things, that we get the chance to have some discussion, and as society, technology brings changes, and some of those changes are really, really good. Some of them are unwanted, and some of them are sort of in the sort of hazy in between, and we're trying to work out, well, how do you weigh up the good from the bad and land on the right pieces?
Well, for most of human history, if you thought people were watching you all the time, that was kind of a bit of a mental health problem, and and something. But these days, they probably are watching you all the time.
Yes. So I should look over my shoulder a little bit more.
Yeah, and I remember years ago asking people if there's actually a word for justified paranoia as opposed to just paranoia. Yeah. But the thing is that it's funny if you go somewhere like China, for example, you kind of assume that you're being watched by these cameras all the time because it's a totalitarian state, and they're basically watching that you don't in any way oppose or threaten them. But it seems to be everywhere now. Everywhere you go, you're watched by cameras pretty much all the time. And I was actually thinking about this from a slightly different point of view. I was thinking, what if I decided I didn't want to be watched by cameras? Would I be able to go to the supermarket? I don't think so, because I think the moment you get into a supermarket, I was in my my local supermarket a couple of days ago, and I noticed that the woman behind the counter who cuts the ham and the cheese and so on the deli counter was wearing a body cam on the front of her tunic, and clearly that's because they're having problems with people being violent or something in supermarkets. But that's another level of surveillance, really. You're being constantly watched by these things. With people, if people in supermarkets behind the supermarket cheese counter are wearing body cams, then I think it's time to assume that this stuff is everywhere now.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I guess it makes me wonder. Do we have any choice at all? In this matter, is it even worth us having a?
Do we have free will?
Is it worth us having a chat about it, Bill?
Yeah, that's philosophy. Do we have any choice? No, we don't have any choice. I don't. I mean, you could go bush, you can go off grid. It's not really a practical option for most people. For the vast majority of us, I think it's part of life now. I think you're going to be watched all the time. People back in medieval times, people were like concerned. They thought that angels might be watching them if they did something naughty, and there would be divine retribution. Nowadays, it's not angels that are watching you; it's usually bots that are watching you, and it's not quite divine retribution if you do something naughty, but you're going to get caught.
Yeah. Look, I do find this quite fascinating because we've had enough situations where we've seen it surveillance technology used in solving a lot of crimes.
Yeah.
Right. It's I think from that perspective, it's very strong. And I remember a discussion going back a good few years ago on the New Zealand Tech podcast around encryption. And there was a push at that time, and it could even be going back 10 years, but certainly, would have been more than 5 years ago, I think. And I guess what I had in my mind was, hey, we've been successful historically with, wiretaps on phones and, monitoring text messages of criminals and so on. And there was this, this push coming through from, one government or another that, they wanted sort of encryption, protected apps and chat platforms and so on to be opened up so that, the government could, effectively have access if they needed to. Now, I think at that time we were probably talking of sort of court order type stuff that they would be able to gain some, some sort of access. And I think the pushback, on the flip side of it was, well, as soon as you kind of, open things up, so government's got access, you also, open things up from a perspective of it's going to be easier for hackers, and there's a whole lot of other perspectives depending on how you open it up, right? So depending on what type of mechanism you use for that backdoor, you potentially leave things open. But of course, sort of since that time, we've just kind of kept becoming more and more digital as a society. And some of these things, and looking in the article there's references, to a lot of non-government type surveillance things as well as government type mechanisms. So reference to AI tech being used for recognizing number plates, and I remember discussing that. I think it might have even been something like the US border control. where they were paying for a technology to do that, and get some sort of visibility on the vehicles going backwards and forwards across the borders. I don't know whether it was to look for particular patterns or criminals.
There is a system like that in New Zealand too, which recognises number plates.
Yeah, so there's that happening in New Zealand. The US one, I remember what happened was the private entity that was kind of doing it, they got breached, and so all of the data was effectively gone. And we've seen that kind of happen by governments around the world as well. So there's an aspect here of, in some ways, whether it's government that does it or private entities, there's a risk in terms of where that data can go, right? You can't control it, which kind of crosses into that encryption, breaking encryption sort of discussion of, you start these things out with particular things in mind, but you don't actually know, where things are going to end up, and even where the data goes. It's not necessarily any confidence you can have in the security of the data.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me about this is we don't seem to be any safer for all this either. I mean,
not at all.
I mean, if anything, crime is up. And there's more of it. You're less safe walking around, say, central Auckland today than you were back before this was all possible.
Yeah.
And yet everywhere in central Auckland there are security cameras and surveillance going on. So
so what do we need to do? Step it up, Bill?
Well.
Pre-crime, there's some movies that suggest the way we can go there.
My fear is that people are using security cameras, society in general, and governments and local governments and organisations and so on are using security cameras where they perhaps ought to have more coppers on the beat and more security people in shops and things, rather than just relying on cameras, because the cameras don't stop the crime being committed, they just record it. And so
not really a deterrent these days.
No, it's not really,
right?
it
might have been once.
It's clearly not a deterrent. It's so it's not working. But having said that, I can't see it going away. I think the thing is it just gets cheaper and easier to do this, and now that you can use AI to monitor camera footage, it becomes even more ubiquitous. So look, it's a horrible thing. I would love for us to be able to legislate against it and for it to be stopped, but that's just not going to happen. So I don't know. I mean, one day we'll rise up and destroy the machines, perhaps. But I just think this is locked in now, and it's not a good thing. It's not a good change.
And I guess coming back to has it helped us and so on. I mean, I would imagine it will have helped in certain degrees, but obviously it doesn't address the sort of underlying issues that sort of lead to the crime and the issues that we see in societies, right? Those things are more deeply rooted, and putting a bit of technology over the top doesn't solve them.
No, that's right. And you can sometimes it can push some of that activity further underground. So as well at the same time. But look, I'm not comfortable with it. I'm really not comfortable with certain aspects of it. I wasn't all that comfortable with the idea of the lady behind the cheese counter having a surveillance. I mean, if it's for her safety, then that's fair enough. But I don't know that it is. I think it's almost a case of we do this because we can. And who knows, maybe somewhere down the track we can mine that data. We can mine that image of Bill Bennett buying some tasty cheese from the lady in the New World shop and flog him something, use our algorithms and all our systems and so on to go back and sell him things. I think it's as extreme as that.
And there's a degree to, even if it's not for that sort of cause, where do you draw the line, right?
Well,
we start seeing a lot of crime in toilets. What do? You go, well, we're going to put cameras in the toilets because there's crime in the toilets. We're getting too much graffiti, right?
Do we put them in schools?
So.
I mean, how many cameras should be in a school?
Not more than 1,000.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, exactly. I mean,
But actually, there is, most schools, even though kids aren't allowed to use their phones, the students and the teachers have obviously got devices. So, there is a level to which, technology does run away on us. And I think, you could probably look at sort of the social media world, and it's it's an interesting example. It's, in some ways, it's simpler because, the world of social media is largely tied up in the hands of, a very small number of countries, globally with the dominance. But when you look at it, there's a huge amount of harm that is caused through the use of social media. But it's very, very complicated in some ways to get your head around. Well, what's the right way to sort of balance that out? And I think probably we'll have a whole mix of opinions when you talk to people across society based on how they've been impacted or how they've been scammed.
Well,
and,
I don't think we as a society we're beginning to address these problems yet. I think the day will come. I think it's one of these things which I think that just suddenly one day there will be something that happens, and suddenly everyone is onto it, and it'll become a big issue. That tends to be the way I think these crises come to a head. But look, no, I'm not comfortable, and I'm not sure it's the appropriate use of technology either.
Yeah. That article, if folks want to look it up, we'll link to it from the NZ Tech podcast. It's called The Surveilled Society: Who is Watching You and How, and really it goes into some of these mechanisms where we're being watched. The body cams are mentioned, speed safety cameras, billboards that have got, at times have had cameras on them.
The billboards now, they actually can serve up ads depending on who they can see in the crowd in front of the billboard. So if the billboard can detect that there's people looking in front of the billboard are mainly women, for example, then they can put up advertising which is mainly aimed at women. If it's children, they can put up advertising that's mainly aimed at children. Billboards are that smart now to know what they're, who's looking at them, and they also use that to count how many people actually look at the billboard as well as just walk past.
And look, I think a lot of these use cases, they make a reasonable amount of sense. But of course, in every case, there's a flip side. How long the data is kept, what other databases do they tap into, and so on. Because there are public databases that, probably 99% of New Zealanders will be captured in, or whatever that percentage is. That's one of those statistics made up on the spot, by the way.
Well, but you're quite right. I mean, we used to think this kind of dystopian future was A, the future, and B, something would happen in countries which weren't democratic and were pretty otherwise uncomfortable places to live. But now it's everywhere, and it's stop the bus. I want to get off.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to find some folks who have done, sort of dug a bit deeper on these things, and see if we can maybe do an episode or two to delve into a little bit more, because I know there are folks that are they've been spending a lot of time sort of looking at these things. It is an area though that I guess you can end up in a kind of conspiracy theory type of place. But to some degree, I think it's good to explore the thoughts and the possibilities. And I guess you say look at China, where they've got a social credit or social scoring system, and their cameras and so on tie into that. Maybe it's not so conspiracy when you look at these places of what the worst sort of possibilities are, and the likes of, I guess, Black Mirror and Netflix, other shows, give us some sort of a taste of the possibilities. And we need to make sure, as a society, we actually, we steer in the better directions, not the worst ones.
Well, there's another angle to this that I just want to mention. I don't think we should delve too far into this, but do you remember the fuss or the fuss when people starting putting in smart speakers in their homes, and you can be listened to all the time by these things. Well, recently there's been quite a lot of stories about how those smart speakers, they're not making money. They're not. It's not a profitable business. I mean, it's not a profitable business for different reasons. The reason is that no one thinks of using a smart speaker to buy their next lot of washing powder or toothpaste or whatever. It's not a great UI for that kind of role, and that's why it doesn't make money. But the point is that kind of surveillance technology, that's what it is. It's a form of surveillance capitalism. Smart speakers are a form of surveillance capitalism. It doesn't necessarily work under its own terms, and I think that goes with a lot of this other stuff. Is that it's there, it's watching you, but it's not necessarily working and doing the job that people think that it's doing. It's just a bloody annoyance.
And when the financial aspects don't line up, that can also be have an impact on whether corners are cut.
Yeah,
right.
Or whether we can find another more abusive business model. That will bring in some dosh.
When I walk out the front door of our building, there's cameras standing there, and it's like that's just how it is on I guess most streets today. But what I would do if I was uncomfortable with, let's say, the information that the local my bank or somebody that I'm a customer of, I can get in touch and say, well, you need to through the privacy laws, I can get in touch and say, tell me what data you have on me, and then you can go back to them and say, please remove that data. I want to exit as a customer, and I don't want you to hold all that data on me. When you've got cameras in the street, you don't necessarily, they're not labeled. They don't say, oh, this is a council camera, this is a traffic camera, this camera is owned by the
Russian Secret Service,
the landlord of the building, or the Russian Secret Service. And in your conspiracy theory case there, Bill. But hey, who knows, and who knows how all those sort of dots join up. And in fact, there was some news coverage of an Auckland security company recently, and I could probably look up the name, and it highlighted it was either news coverage or somebody within that sector told me, and so I'm just seeing if I can see anything about it. But basically, this particular security company, which has a fair bit of market share in the Auckland market, is now Chinese owned. And so, you join these dots back up. You were mentioning a totalitarian regime. Oh, okay. And then, China has a certain level of kind of power if they want access to data owned by, Chinese organizations. You join those dots up, and actually it's not necessarily a conspiracy to say that, if they had a lot of cameras. Now, I don't know if this company has a lot of cameras or has access to it, but if they're in the security space, then maybe. Then, what are the possibilities there?
I don't know if I mentioned this previously on the podcast, but the business about the Chinese vehicles, the BYDs and so on, all have equipment which knows where your car is all the time. And I think the Teslas have the same thing. What that could conceivably mean is that both through Tesla, the US government, and through BYD, the Chinese government, have got extraordinarily good maps of New Zealand roads should their military ever need that information.
Yeah. Well, I guess they could fire up Google Maps and so on too.
Well,
So just having a look here. Simply Security have recently sold 90% of their shares to Chinese investors, as listed with the company's office. Armaguard and First Security, the two largest security companies in New Zealand, are offshore owned as well, without any sort of reference back. Now, yeah, these are just things to be, to be thinking of in the sort of broader picture when there is so much surveillance.
Yeah, well,
and
also
it's not necessarily completely controlled from New Zealand, then maybe we do have a challenge.
Also, those petabytes of surveillance data that companies accumulate, turning that into money can be their exit strategy. So, selling it to someone at some point down the road can be their exit strategy. So, yeah, look, it's awful, and if you start to think about it too much, you're just not going to sleep at nights, because
we'll solve it on this show, Bill.
Yeah.
There'll be more episodes coming up. We'll find a solution.
We'll fix it. Yeah.
And yeah, I guess one of the other stories that came up was around Hayden AI, NEC New Zealand, deploying these AI cameras on New Zealand buses to improve road safety by monitoring traffic violations.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it, but you could say that the robots are dobbing you in.
Yeah, I don't want to be seen by these cameras. Look, it's really hard, because we do have issues that, yes, you could do them with people. You could address traffic violations with more police, but I think there's a degree to which, yes, we probably will increase the number of police in New Zealand, but we are a society that's going to lean in on technology too, and it's kind of a matter of finding what are the appropriate ways in which we can get that technology leverage right.
The thing is, right, is that on the one hand, you can say, and you can make a really good case, right, that looking at if every traffic violation is punished, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You can make that case, but sometimes there's a really good reason why you went 5K over the limit for this particular stretch of road. I can remember when the cameras first came in on Auckland council vehicles, I got pinged for turning across the bus lane on Simon Street. I didn't go drive in the bus lane. I turned across the bus lane to turn into a driveway. But because I happened to be just there at the moment when the car went past, I got a $40 fine. And I know that I didn't drive in the bus lane. I just drove across it because, trust me, I have driven in bus lanes, right? I'm prepared to confess. But that time I wasn't. And I just felt then that it's kind of arbitrary. It's some of those violations which are perceived by cameras and bots and so on, there might be really good reasons why you've put your foot down just briefly because to avoid something, for example. But the robot doesn't know that. A copper would, if you got stopped by a cop and
you'd have a chat.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, I have had similar issues with with some of those same traffic violation type systems. One in Newmarket where I came around a corner, I kind of slightly clipped the bus lane, so the camera showed me clipping the bus lane, but it could clearly show that I wasn't in the bus lane. I just clipped the corner of it as I was just turning the corner, right? Because the bus lane started quite close into the turning into Khyber Pass Road. And then a little further up, it showed me in the bus lane. And I was thinking, well, I already wasn't in the bus lane. Why would I be in the bus lane? And when I sort of thought back, I recalled doing a U-turn. And I think what I did was I, clipped into the bus lane to go, so I would wider, so I could do a full U-turn without it being a, 3-point turn on the road. Legally quite legitimate because you can only get pinged, I think, if you're in that lane for whatever it is, 50 meters or something. There's some limit. But of course their camera takes 2 stills and it's like, join that one up where I clipped the corner, but I wasn't actually in the lane with one, 50 meters up or whatever. And there we go. You get the $200 fine.
It may be logical, it may be rational, but you can't reason with it.
There we go. Yeah, well, yeah, they don't seem to respond so well to letters these days, or emails, or whatever you send in. Now, also on the New Zealand front, you wrote recently on your blog at billbennett.co.nz in Download Weekly that you produce in your newsletter, around sort of the impact on New Zealand telecommunications over recent years, with the big change, I guess you were referring to, being that Huawei's largely exited the market in the last what are we talking, 5 years? Is it
yeah, it started in 2019 really. Look, the thing is, unlike other countries, we didn't ban Huawei. We kind of didn't have to, because what the government did at the time, when I think it was Andrew Little was the minister at the time, the decision was kind of delegated to the thing called the TICSA legislation, which is like it's a telecommunications something
Interception Capability and Security Act 2013. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And basically, there's a basically equipment has to be certified that it's suitable for the network, and the Huawei gear didn't pass that certification process, and that's kind of a politically polite and nice way of saying thank you, but no thank you to Huawei, whereas other countries just came out and banned them.
And this was particularly looking at their technology being incorporated into cell sites at a network level,
specifically on 5G networks as well. Now,
the mobile front's different, isn't it? Because that's where we saw, Google put under pressure by US government. To it wasn't just Google, but chip makers and Google and so on.
But we'll come back to that, Paul, because that's kind of weird the way that worked. But if we go back to the network equipment, particularly on the 5G network. Now the thing is up until that point, Spark was heavily committed to what basically Huawei dug Spark out of the hole after. Do you remember about 15 years ago, the Spark XT network went down, and it went down 2 or 3 times, and that was
a huge embarrassment for Spark.
It was. And so when they came to upgrade their network, they moved to Huawei.
As they were at that stage. Right?
Sorry,
Telecom as they were at that stage.
Telecom. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it was when Paul Reynolds was in charge. When they came to upgrade their network, Huawei dug them out of a hole, and the Huawei kit was excellent quality kit. Huawei had been in 2 Degrees, I think, from the start of 2 Degrees in New Zealand as well. So 2 Degrees and Spark were largely built their 4G networks with, and not just their 4G, but their 4.5G and their 4.9G and their 4.99G and so on. It was all Huawei, and the kit was excellent, and it was a good price. There's all kinds of criticisms people make of the company, how they may have had some IP theft in their history and so on. That's by the time that they were building 4G networks, that was ancient history, and they were doing a great job of it. And it was actually, it wasn't just that the equipment was good quality. It's not particularly brilliant quality, but it was of good enough quality to run those networks. But they were rolled out quickly and efficiently, and they were upgraded really quickly and efficiently too. And the thing is that Huawei were very competitive on price, very aggressive and competitive on price, because Chinese companies are, and there are some advantages Chinese companies have with exchange and what goes on back in tacit support from the Chinese government and so on.
Cost of labor. When you stack up all those things, of course they could undercut anybody in the world and deliver, be very competitive and and be able to have the resourcing for good service.
That's right. And at the time, Vodafone, as it was then, which is now One New Zealand, they were the mobile company that didn't have Huawei kit. Now, when Simon Mutter went to the government and he wanted to use Huawei kit for the 5G build, and they applied for a license from the I think it's GCSB, but it's certainly a government security agency. They applied for the license and they got turned down because they failed to meet the TICS regulations, and that's when this started. What the immediate consequence of that was that Spark couldn't get to start building 5G as early as it would like to have done it. It was probably 12 to 18 months delay on getting started with its 5G build, simply because of that ruling. But not only did that slow down the introduction of 5G, the thing that's really happened over the intervening 5 years is that Spark and 2 Degrees, and to some extent also One New Zealand, pay more for telecommunications network equipment because there's not the competition. There's not the competitive pressure on the companies that are remaining in that market to sharpen their pencils. There is competition still, but it's just not as intense. Trust me, Huawei's competition was intense, and that would have lowered the price for everyone, even those people that weren't Huawei customers. So basically our telcos ended up paying more for the 5G network equipment than they otherwise would have done. The upshot of that was they probably rolled it out a little slower because they've got to raise the money to buy the kit, and their budgets wouldn't stretch so far, so that in year one, if you're budgeting 100 million for year one of your build, you get fewer towers than you would have done if you were buying from Huawei. So it's probably slowed down the build a bit. I also wanted to look at whether or not we're missing out on technology that Huawei has, which is particularly brilliant and other countries are using, and we don't. And that's actually not really the case. The one case that you could possibly make is that in countries where Huawei is still operating, some of those countries have moved to 5G standalone quicker than we have, and that's just basically a next generation of 5G, it's just a better version of 5G. But we're moving to 5G standalone around about now. I mean, Spark's actually doing that as we speak. So we're probably a little slower with rollouts, a little slower with introducing new technology, and we're paying a bit more for it. And of course, the thing is it ends up the consumer pays more for that. So it's not damaging. We're not really damaged because we're just paying a little bit more than we otherwise would. And we're perhaps a little slower down that curve than we would be. Now, if we go back to the business with the phones, the handsets, you're quite right that it wasn't any government legislation here that brought it out. It was basically the fact that the US government wouldn't let Google put the full G Suite and of Android everything on their phones.
Yeah, no more Play Store basically makes your phones massively degraded, right? And then there were other things around chips and so on that were able to be used. So it became a combination of issues, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was really something that affected the entire world outside of China. Did we lose out there? Yes, we did lose out there because our handset market has two companies matter really, Samsung and Apple. Samsung and Apple probably have about 83% of the New Zealand handset market. And the remaining 20% is largely those unbranded phones that One New Zealand sells in its stores. After those three, there's almost nothing. I mean, the next player is probably on 2 or 3% of the market. So again, we don't have the competition in the the price competition, and not only the price competition, but the thing that when the market had three players, the three players, Huawei, Samsung, and Apple, were falling over themselves to innovate and push things forward. You'll notice that in the last 5 years, phones, they're better, but they haven't really moved forward in the way they moved forward in the decade before, 5 years ago. So, so we're really seeing, it's the damage isn't huge, but we're just not seeing some of the benefits that we could otherwise have had.
Yeah, I just did a look online, and I mentioned we're going to chat around this some of the new hardware. The HP OmniBook comes with their HP AI companion, and so rather than googling it, I just asked the question, how much market share has Oppo got? Because from my thinking, Oppo has been sort of the kind of the biggest winner in terms of handsets from if you put aside the benefits for Apple and Samsung, but in terms of the Chinese brands, Oppo seems to have kind of picked up the most share, and it's saying it's single digit 5.2% is what they're saying is their market share in New Zealand. So it's as kind of the third player when it comes to handset.
But a long way behind.
It's not much of a market share, is it?
Well, yeah, and the strange thing, I mean, I wasn't going to mention this, not because I'm squeamish or anything, but the thing about Oppo is if Huawei is too Chinese to get hold of that technology, how come Oppo isn't? Because it's just as Chinese as Huawei. And in fact, I don't know if it's true now, but at one point, Oppo had some Chinese government involvement in the ownership, I believe. So
that was certainly the case with ZTE. I'm not sure about Oppo.
No, certainly. Sorry, you're sorry. I'm confusing them with ZTE. Yeah, you're right there. But anyway, the thing is they're still Chinese brands. I mean, whatever threat Huawei handsets would have had to the West, Oppo has to be the same threat if there is a threat. And the truth is there isn't really a threat. The thing about the network equipment is there are arguments that you can make that those bans and so on were justified. With the handsets, you can't say that it's justified stopping Huawei and not justified stopping Oppo. You just can't make that case.
Well, yeah, there were different cases that were made. It wasn't that they were from China specifically. I think it was, there were some sort of nuances to, particular concerns around the activities of each company.
Well, no, I think the main thing about the Huawei phone ban, with the fact that Huawei's was shut out of American technology, probably had a lot more to do with trade policy in the US than anything to do with security. I mean, it was basically at a time when the US government was very keen on bashing China and promoting the idea that China was commercially an enemy. And so I think that I just think that that's a bit odd. I'm not saying that these companies are fine and dandy and we should just accept everything. I'm just saying that there's one rule for Huawei and another rule for Oppo, and that's odd.
Yeah, look, it's it's a fascinating area. There's a fair bit of info, online around these sort of market shares. You're just looking at some historical data. So this is IDC 2024 data. You've got Samsung and Apple kind of crossing over the last couple of years. Actually, in this particular chart showing Samsung beating out Apple, but this hasn't been updated.
No, over the years it usually does
perfectly. So you get that, and then they've got Oppo sort of moving between sort of 6 or 7 and 15%, and this graph sort of shows them ending up under 10. With then you mentioned about the sort of no name or the generic brands, One NZ kind of neck and neck with them at around a very similar with their phones. So it's it's something that from what consumers spend. Yeah, we're probably spending a chunk more even on that consumer side too than we would otherwise. That's I guess the just the reality of it.
Well, up until that came in, most of the Android phone brands around the world weren't really profitable. I mean, I think Samsung was just about profitable, but Samsung made more money selling screens to Apple for its iPhones than it made from selling the Galaxy phones. And there's a whole conga line of brands that were really big enough. I mean, Sony. What happened to Sony Ericsson phones? They've gone. LG. They've gone. They weren't making money. They weren't profitable.
They make good phones though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now I do want to talk a little bit about some of the hands-on with gadgets. So I've got here the Z Fold 6, which is Samsung's newest, and they released the Z Fold and the Z Flip. Now they've sent this the Z Fold, which is the one that effectively, if you fold it open, you've got a tablet of sorts in your hands. It's a reasonably large screen. It's almost square when it's in your hand. Probably a couple of observations. Yes, there is some AI sort of stuff that you can run locally on there. Nothing that's really got me too excited when Samsung ran through the highlights. So I'm not generally super excited about the hardware from that perspective. What I do like around it is you've got really good Samsung cameras in it. You do have the option now of a case to protect it. So if you drop the thing, you haven't necessarily done $3,100 to $3,800 worth of damage. And of course, there's a level of repairability with these devices. That one that I've been using and having a look at it had sent separately a case which can carry the stylus. So for those who like to be able to do the scribbling on your screen and so on, then that device does it. The Z Fold
and the
6
Fold is so much better than the earlier ones, isn't it?
I think they've got to a point now of really some maturity, and I guess if you were to look across at Apple, sometimes they wait until until these technologies have got mature and good and reliable. And look, it really feels like a really nicely polished piece of hardware now. Certainly, there's the premium that you pay for it, and there's a segment of the market that wants that. And is absolutely happy to pay for it. I also like the fact that they've got to the point where basically, if you've got it closed, you've still got an external screen that is virtually edge to edge in terms of the screen once you've got a bit of a case on it, and it's not dramatically different. It's a slightly different aspect ratio, a bit taller than a typical smartphone, but actually you don't have to open it up if you just want to use it as a normal smartphone. Now it's pretty chunky when it's folded like that, but I think we've kind of got to a point of some maturity. The one thing that they have not been able to address, I guess because of the hinging, is they're not dust proof yet. So while you've got a level of water resistance, they warn you against getting it near to alcohol and seawater and so on. But fresh water, you've got some protection there.
Yeah, no, I'm actually quite impressed by the by them, but I think we're still in the it's still a niche product. And I don't think it's just the price that makes it niche. I think that it's still, it's nice and folding screens, and I can see that there's a lot of use for folding. I mean, I could use that folding screen a lot more than other people because by nature of my work. It would give me in effect an iPad, a tablet. I almost said an iPad, but it's obviously Samsung. But it would give me a tablet. as well as a phone. That's great, but it hasn't really caught the public's imagination in the way that it might have done. And I don't think it's going to now. I think it's the same. It's the same with the other technology, which is in a similar position, is VR. Those VR headsets, they're kind of good now, but they really just haven't caught the public's imagination. And I'm thinking back a decade to when 3D television was the thing, and it kind of came in and looked great for a bit, and then you just realize, well, actually, I don't know, and I'm a bit like that about folding phones.
Didn't really catch on. Yeah. Look, I'm a little bit here nor there on them, but I get why people are into them. Would I carry one as my primary phone? Yeah, I probably would. If that was an option. I guess what I've found over the years is, different companies will send me different equipment to review, sometimes for short terms, sometimes for longer. I'd probably still lean in towards, looking for a device that's really secure. And I think, look, this is an area where Android and Samsung have made real strides over the last few years. You get years and years worth of guaranteed operating system updates now on the latest Samsung phones, even down to a sub $500 handset. You get years of updates, even more years of I think it's usually 4 years of operating system updates across. Even as I say, the sort of some of the sub $500 handsets, maybe down to $300 type price points. So things are a lot more, competitive when it comes to some of these important areas. And ultimately, it's now a lot closer from that security standpoint. And I think you'll come across cybersecurity practitioners that are iOS, and you'll come across cybersecurity practitioners that are all in on Android. I think that's probably somewhat hard to argue whether Apple should sort of hold that dominance that they traditionally did from a security standpoint.
Look, I think that's true. I think the thing about Apple is Apple has the phones and the computers and the tablets, and if you're really interested, the watches as well. Whereas if you're not Apple, then you tend to have Windows and Android. And I'm not sure. I mean, I know that they integrate nicely. I know that Windows computers work well with Androids, but it just doesn't feel as smooth to me, the move between a Windows computer and an Android phone, as perhaps moving between two Apple things. It's just not as smooth and as sweet. But look, it's functionally as good for most people.
One thing that I should mention to listeners is that moving from iOS to Android or Android to iOS has got a lot easier in recent years, and that includes if you've got messages that are in a messages app and so on. Bringing a lot of that sort of stuff over, particularly if they're text messages back to a mobile number and so on.
I still find it really jarring to move between Mac OS and Windows, though.
You haven't done it enough, Bill.
Oh.
You obviously haven't done it enough.
I think life's too short.
So, as I mentioned, I've been using, spending some time looking at the likes of HP OmniBook. We will come in future onto some of the other equipment that uses the Snapdragon processors. And I guess the big dream of these was incredible battery life. So I'm just looking here at the battery. I'm on 25% battery, looking at the HP OmniBook. Now it's been running for definitely over an hour, and I would probably start at about I think 32%. So, I've got up more than an hour and used up 7%. Now, yes, I've not been sort of super active. We've been talking, but I've been looking bits and pieces up and using the device. And I think, what we're seeing here is that difference between the Intel based laptops that we're used to and the ARM based laptops. Have definitely got a better battery life. But I think we look back and it was a few episodes ago that we chatted to Avram Pilch, the editor at Tom's Hardware. And if you haven't heard that one and you're kind of interested in this, that's worth going back to listen to, because he talked about the battery life differences. And I think certainly, I'd maybe drunk a little bit too much of the Kool-Aid in terms of, how good this difference was going to be. Not as dramatic as, say, your M2, M3 based MacBooks in terms of the battery life.
But this is the first generation of these.
Well, I would argue this is long from the first generation, because the ARM-based Windows machines, started about 12 years ago.
Windows RT.
And Microsoft have had so many goes at this and trying to get the hardware. But what we are doing is we're hitting a spot now where this becomes a viable option. We've got the best compatibility Windows has ever had, and I think the best performance on ARM. But there are still gaps. There's a lot of apps that are not available, natively to work with these new ARM chips. So they have to go through an emulation layer, or in some cases they won't work at all. So I think there's still a level of, hey, buyer beware on this sort of thing. I guess if you were to buy one from a retailer, you might well be covered by the Consumer Guarantees Act if you have an issue there. So that might be something to consider. I'd be curious what the return rates might be.
What are the big headline apps that won't run?
Good question. In my world, Adobe Audition is one of them that hasn't been running yet. There are lots and lots that will just run through emulation, and they will be okay. But I think it creates a challenge. Of course, we've kind of got the two audiences between those that are buying, personal devices, or for small business where you might, buy, one or two devices for, a single person business. And then as you get into the broader business world where, organizations are buying devices with Windows Professional on them for the varying, security and other benefits that fit in there. And I would say what we're going to see in that business world is probably a slower, a level of interest, but there will be more caution, because often, they're buying fleets of devices in big chunks, and you can't afford to, be in a position where you've got a whole chunk of devices that don't work. There also seems to be a reasonable sort of premium on these, these laptops at this point, but we're already seeing those, some of those price points come down. So look, I think HP with the OmniBook, and this is one of their, their consumer level devices, but it looks, looks very, very, slick in the, I'm not sure. Actually, I didn't check whether this is exactly what the materials are, whether it's all aluminium or with some titanium or what have you. But a really nice, quality looking laptop, especially considering that it's a consumer one. The sort of $3,000 odd, price point. Yep, it's not your bargain basement laptop. But this is where it's going, and I would imagine that in the years ahead, we will see a lot of these in the market and a lot of people using them.
I think I'd like to see the business model as well, actually. I'd really like to see the business model. But I think we were chatting before we came onto the podcast about how HP seems to have lifted its game again recently. I don't know if you get that impression, but HP's always been number one in the New Zealand marketplace
for a long time.
For years now, and it dominates here in ways that it just doesn't dominate in other markets. pretty much every second laptop sold in New Zealand is a HP laptop. But there's been sort of times over the history of HP laptops where they've kind of come in, they're really good for a bit, and then they just fall behind a little bit, and the other Windows ones start to catch up. And HP seems to have done that move, that sort of big step forward again. Is that your perception of the HP laptops?
Look, I think what my team have seen, because when I look back at Gorilla, we had very good experiences with Lenovo for a long period, and sometimes variable experiences with other brands, and as I guess as we started re-looking at HP, probably going over a decade back now. And what I've sort of noticed over that period is a consistency. And, one of the benefits they have is that market share in New Zealand. What it means is there's more stock.
Yeah.
They've got really good support. It's not always perfect, but generally, very, very good. It's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not sort of, outsourced over the fence to another party and so on. So it seems to be done, pretty well all round. And so, I guess that's one of the reasons we were happy to have them as a partner, on the New Zealand Tech Podcast, because it's a brand that, I'm happy to use. I'm comfortable to do that. But you'd ask me about some of the other brands, and no, I wouldn't be interested in in having them necessarily
for a long time I've used Macs, but I also had a HP for when I needed to do Windows work, and I really enjoyed the HP. I like their machines. Mm-hmm. They're excellent. I quite frankly, I think they're sort of let down a bit by the software, but
well, I will just mention before we wrap up the episode. I was pretty skeptical around this HP AI companion.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I've completely thrown my skepticism out the window, but having tried it and having looked into it, looks like they're using OpenAI's GPT-4 at the moment. In terms of what it can do locally, probably not a whole lot. So it is going out online. So, that's something that businesses will need to look at. It's still in beta. But one thing that it does allow you to do is to bring in, some source files. The only limit I've seen so far, I haven't seen a limit to the number of files, but you have to go in and kind of attach or link files. So you can give it your own local data sources in terms of, say, Word documents or PDFs. And then you can go into, they call it the analyze section. And so you can go in and then, be asking questions that relate to that data that you've fed in. So in the Microsoft world, to do that means you've got to have their Copilot for Microsoft 365, which is a $600 investment on an annual basis. So here you've got this capability. At this stage, it's built in, no cost on the consumer devices. I'll be interested to explore what that means from a business perspective, because if that's part of the capability that that is going to come with these HP laptops, then that becomes a competitive advantage. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And obviously there's a huge difference between that and Copilot for Microsoft 365. But it is that they are still delivering a capability. And of course there's lots of other ways of getting these sorts of capabilities, but having these sorts of things built in, it becomes a plus for sure.
I think my next task for tomorrow is to contact HP and see if I can get a borrow of one.
Yeah. Sounds worthwhile, Bill. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. Thank you, Bill. Great to catch up. There's a couple of other topics we didn't get into. There's probably and in some ways there will be some alignment around the aspects of sort of this society under surveillance topic, and a move towards digital IDs. I think there are some similarities. They are very different, but there is also, some dots that join up there. And Bill, you mentioned before the show started around these, some of the activities going on in relation to digital ID in Australia, and in particular, a QR code that is going to be able to be used, so you can verify yourself when you go out to the nightclub.
Well, it means
you go out for a night on the Terps, you can prove who you are and what your age is.
You can get into the RSL to watch Midnight Oil or whoever is their replacement in 2024.
Yeah. And there's been obviously moves in New Zealand, also new legislation that's come in very, very recently as far as digital ID, but it hasn't had much attention, and probably because it's a kind of complicated topic. What do you what should you say about it? So we'll try and track down some folks that have done some thinking on these topics and delve in a little bit more. And then there was the DDoS attack that Musk's been talking about as he's been doing his live stream interview with Trump. And you had a comment on that one, Bill?
Yeah, well, a ex-Twitter engineer said that there was no denial of service. If there was any denial of service, it was the fact that he got rid of the network assurance team, which was checking that the network was working. And I think that probably rings true, actually.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we will possibly never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, great to have you on the show, Bill. Thanks everybody for listening in. Of course, a big thank you to our show partners, Gorilla, 1NZ, HP, Spark, and 2 Degrees. And all the best. We will catch you all next week. All right. See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.